Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my Victober 2022 reading wrap-up. Victober is the initiative to read some Victorian literature in October, and I believe Kate Howe and Katie from Books and Things are the two major instigators and hosts, and so I'll link to their channels down below. I'm saying, I took part in Victober, but in all honesty, it's more like 2 weeks that started at the very end of October and then moved into November. But I did participate in that way. I guess that still counts. Also, against my better judgment, I have not scripted this video because I am getting this up a fair bit later than I hoped. I have a deadline that I want to post my first NaNoWriMo vlog tomorrow morning, so I should be posting this tonight. So I feel like I'm just going to give off some dashed off opinions, I suppose, about my Victober reading, which I felt a little hesitant about, trepidatious about, because I'm judging, highly classical, well, in the not literal sense, but, tried and true and around for almost 150 years old literature here. And so I feel like I have to back up my opinions or something, especially maybe if I don't like some things that much. To get into some specifics, maybe that would be a good idea now. I read 2 Thomas Hardy books. I started with Far from the Madding Crowd, and then I moved into TESS of the D'Urbervilles. I found these 2 Signet Classic editions at my library used bookstore a couple of years ago, and they've been sitting cheerfully on my shelf all this time. And indeed, I had some quibbles with both of the books, and especially Far from the Madding Crowd. When I posted my review to Goodreads, a friend of mine who is much wiser and well-learned than I said she also didn't like the book that much, or I think liked it less than I did, really. I liked it. She liked it less. So I feel a little more justified in perhaps giving more critical opinions of these Thomas Hardy classics. And indeed, these feel like some of his most classic work in terms of being his most popular works. I remember a few years ago now, I did a buddy read with Curtis of Books and Books. We read The Return of the Native by Thomas Hardy when we were deciding what we wanted to read, and somehow we decided to center on Thomas Hardy. And I first brought up Tess of the D'Urbervilles or Far from the Madding Crowd, and he said he wanted to do something a bit more off the beaten path. So that's why my first Thomas Hardy book from back then was The Return of the Native. But now on my own, I decided to be a little more basic and read some of his more famous books, so I believe them to be. And without further ado, I'll just give some thoughts about them. So I already mentioned this one a little bit more than the other one. This is Far from the Madding Crowd, the first Thomas Hardy book I read for Victober. This is the story of a love quadrangle between Bathsheba Everdeen and 3 men who come into her life. This is also the unusual tale of a Victorian woman who comes into some property on her own and is bequeathed her uncle's farm and decides to try and run it as like a woman operator, which is highly unusual for the time. And it seems like she does okay, but she trips and falls a little bit too. And in a way, I had mixed feelings about that as well, but maybe that was some of the more realistic parts of this, that she can't just, automatically be really good at running a farm, especially if, it's, I think it just kind of happened to her in a way. It's not necessarily something she was intending to inherit. But anyway, amongst taking care of the farm, and there are very long sections, some of which she's in and some of which she isn't, of the farmhands and the neighbors and so forth, and what it would be like to live in rural England doing these tasks. Amidst all that, Bathsheba comes across 3 gentlemen with whom she has romances or, possible leads to marriage, that sort of thing. The first one is with a shepherd called Gabriel Oak, who she meets before she becomes this farmer landowner. When they're more on equal footing, in fact, and living near each other, he proposes marriage And she, in a rather modern turn of phrase, I would think, decides she'd rather see what else is out there before, jumping into a marriage, especially when it feels like it happens. Everything here happens so quickly. It's like two people of the opposite sex see each other, and it's like, you have to have a marriage proposal within, I don't know, the chapter or something. It felt very fast, and I wondered if it was a cultural thing because, single women and single men too, I suppose, are less common. Like you want to get settled and have a family and belong to society that way. And, being single is not as culturally appropriate in the Victorian era. But Bathsheba decides she doesn't want to jump into marriage with Gabriel. And they part ways. And the next time they meet each other, they're on different class levels because she's a landowner and he's still a shepherd, although he had fallen on some hard times and comes to work for her because he needs the work. The second suitor in her line of sight is William Boldwood, who is a neighbor, and I think like they're now more on par class-wise because they're both farmers, and he comes into her orbit in a way that is a little bit petty or shallow, in that sort of as a joke or a ruse, she decides to send him an unsigned Valentine's card that he deciphers as from her, and he very quickly takes it very seriously. And to be fair, it seems like that's a mean-spirited or a little bit petty or selfish thing to do, to send a Valentine's card to somebody without, intending it to mean anything more, especially in this era or in this culture where it feels like these sorts of events are very serious, and if you're frivolous about it, it doesn't speak well of your character. So I'll give that Bathsheba was in the wrong there, but it does seem like this happens pretty early in the book, and Boldwood is like in her face about it, like you really do like me, even though she is saying, I really didn't mean it that way, and it seems like I think she pays for her sins and more, that he really takes it over the top in terms of not being able to let this go. And it grated on me a little bit as well, because he was highly emotional about this relationship that an obsession that he felt for her after this Valentine's card. And this is coming from a book where the omniscient narrator is constantly laying out the faults of all women. And them being emotional is a big one. And then here we have Boldwood being like the most emotional person in the book. And I feel like there's a reason for that as well, that it is character building. It does lead to his ultimate arc and his ultimate decision and what he does at the end of the book. Maybe it is meant to be a criticism of him that, wait a second, maybe this guy really is way too emotional and that's not legit. Although, he never was, a stand-in for all men, or none of the men were really stand-ins for all men, any of their behavior. It's one of these Victorian affectations that I don't like. This omniscient narrator with a very judgmental opinion, a very sweeping, stereotypical opinion about, how all women are, or this or that, but mostly women in this case, which is so odd, because I know this is meant to be sort of a forward-thinking novel of the time in terms of how it treats women. I guess the major thing here is, it is awesome that Bathsheba could be a landowner, and it does seem like even if she made some mistakes along the way, she did do some things right, so, she was shown with some competence, and that's awesome, but so much else of this novel just did not age well, to say it in that way, which I know is controversial, but this omniscient narrator thing is just not for me. It's just, talking in these stereotypes, it's just not realistic at all. It just, I don't feel like adds to what I love in storytelling, which is an honest portrayal of nuanced characters. I don't like it. And then we get into her third lover, who is Sergeant Troy. I had to look up his army title, and this is, I think, where I kind of lose it a little bit. Her relationship with this man. This is, a very stereotypical bad guy. I put in my review, I think he was from the Jane Austen playbook of military men, because her sort of least admirable, least moral male leads tended to be from the military, and that's what he is as well. He impregnated someone else before he met Bathsheba and didn't marry her. In fact, went on a hissy fit because she went to the wrong church, so he decided to call it off, apparently. And then he really ingratiates himself in Bathsheba's life. Obviously, she is of interest to him financially. She can provide for him, maybe get him out of the military, yada yada. But the thing that bothers me is I don't get why she fell for this guy. I mean, from the start, it was like this whole, you're in my face, you're not following social conventions, I don't want anything to do with you, but oh, then I do, because you say some swarmy, maybe a little bit, maybe flirtatious, maybe even charismatic in a way, but I feel like that's really pushing it to call him charismatic. I don't know. From the off, she doesn't seem that interested in him, but the narrative immediately, like when she's alone, she grows obsessed with him. And I feel like I don't get it. I feel like this is like a 180, that it's a stereotype of women becoming obsessive with men, and that she knows that he is no good, but she falls for him anyway, and they do ultimately get married, and it's a pretty miserable marriage because he's a miserable guy. And I'm a little back and forth because I want to feel some sympathy for women who marry the wrong guy, but I don't feel like it's legit. I feel like it's only the sort of thing that happens in books, that, because everything about him and the way that she reacts to him is, ugh, but oh, I still want you anyway. It's like, being attracted to repels you, and I suppose that's one of those stereotypical things women get into, but I didn't buy it because the way he described it is it's the stereotypical things women get into. I was really starting to argue a lot with this novel at this point and think that the stereotypes spoke a little louder than the human characters did. I was not as much of a fan. And by that point, it's sort of the waiting game to see how this immoral marriage would pan out, because we're in a Victorian novel, so obviously a moral of a story has to happen. I guess I can spoil things. This novel is almost 150 years old, to say that, I don't know, it gets very melodramatic. I feel like this is another sort of Victorian thing, maybe. Maybe someone more well-versed than me could say, if melodrama is a major part of this, that Troy, feeling despondent over the death of his baby mama who died, first jumps into the sea, and it seems like he drowned, but then he didn't, and then he comes back, and then he tries to get with Bathsheba again, and that's when Boldwood comes back and, through an emotional outburst, kills him. So it feels like a lot of high drama to get her out of this relationship, but at least at the very end, she gets together with Gabe, who is obviously the best choice of the three of them. Boldwood is, not mentally competent, and Troy is dead, thank goodness, and out of the picture. and Gabe, after all of this, is the most steady guy. So, I mean, in terms of romance and relationships, that was the best ending, but overall, I didn't connect with this book or these characters as much as I really hoped to. I felt let down in a way. I don't know. I was hoping I would like this a lot better than I did. But it was a propulsive read in terms of all the drama, and as much as I feel like the chapters with all of the farmhands and everything, it was a little distracting, and in modern literature I don't think we're as used to as many subplots. It really did lay the groundwork of the world building of what it would be like to be alive in this rural English Victorian setting, and live on the land and do all the things. So and the descriptive physical writing was good as well, so they're ending on a positive. Next, I'll move on to TESS of the D'Urbervilles, where I feel like a lot less positive can be said, although that's misleading. What I mean by that is that this is misery porn. This is really misery porn through and through. Although in a way I liked it better. Maybe that says something about my own cynicism and state of mind. I don't know. But yeah, this is a tragedy. I mean, it's meant to be, and it is. And so anyway, this is a story that also takes place in fictional Wessex slash, rural England, Victorian England. Wessex being Hardy's invention. And Tess's father, who is named John Durbeyfield, is approached with some news that his ancestors were apparently this aristocratic Norman family called the D'Urbervilles. This family has long since, lost its fortune and its standing, and, John Durbeyfield and his struggling family are what's left of it. They're impoverished and everything, and have very little to their name except for a fancy spoon that apparently came to them from the D'Urbervilles. But, status is everything in a way. So John and his wife decide, we are big shots now. We can really marry into money. They go ahead and they find a elderly d'Urberville relation, so they think she is. And they send their daughter Tess to this family to say, hey, we're related. Maybe you can help me out here, get the family out of debt, you know, arrange a good marriage for me, that sort of thing. So Tess goes to do this. I think she feels more reluctant about being so forward with people, but these are her parents and they're in hard times. And actually, Tess also accidentally was involved in something that killed the family horse. So she's kind of on the downswing. And she goes to the d'Urbervilles, but little does she know at first that actually these people are not descended from the Norman family. This is a trading family that up until recently, you know, they made, you know, a fortune through their trade, through being merchants, and decided to, you know, attach themselves to a more respectable name at that point. So they're not actually related, and these people don't have the status as much as the money. I guess money could be status, but that's another bowl of wax, I suppose. But anyway, unfortunately, one of the people who Tess runs into is her cousin, Alec d'Urberville, who's a complete rake. Completely the Sergeant Troyd character, basically, of this book, who is flirtatious and forward and has no regard at all for, you know, the social conventions that will be very hard on Tess if anything untoward would happen sexually between her and a man when she's unmarried. But he really presses on her a lot and, you know, is forcing kisses and intimacies. And frankly, well, anyway, I guess I should say the reason Tess doesn't leave is because she's ultimately offered a position there and her parents push her into it. And ultimately, there's a scene where Tess is alone with Alec in his carriage and he is taking her without her knowledge or consent on this really long and rambling trip. She falls asleep, and the final scene is him advancing on her sleeping form. And from there, we jump forward to the fact that they've been sexually active, she is pregnant, and so forth. To me, this very blatantly speaks of rape. There is nothing in the former scenes that speaks to her truly wanting to be with him. There are some times when she feels like she is forced to be beholden to him, but nothing that speaks to any, you know, consensual reciprocation. And, you know, the scene before the they had sex insinuation is him coming onto her while she's unconscious. This is rape. And, you know, Victorians have a far harder time, I think. I don't know. I don't know. You know, this is emotional. You know, we're talking about women being shamed for being raped and for their sexual activities in general, but I mean, and needing all of this extra proof to say it's rape when everything about this really screams that she's been taken advantage of. And even Hardy, you know, the fact that the subtitle speaks to her being of pure heart, he takes her side. So this is an even more feminist novel where other people would like immediately write her off. It doesn't matter how she had a baby out of wedlock. It doesn't matter that, you know, maybe she was more sinned against. They'd write her off. And I think this is his testament to say that she was wronged by all of these things that happened. And she's a character who is just always highly distressed in a lot of ways. I feel like this is somewhat stereotypical as well, that she always has to be like an emotional wreck in a way. Although, I mean, she was assaulted. Oh my God. And then she loses the baby and her, you know, everything. It's misery porn. It's awful. She refuses to marry him. She doesn't love him, which I guess is somewhat the most stalwart thing that she could do. And I think it would be a pretty miserable marriage. And I think she'd also be shamed by him because he's a rake. He'd probably continue to do things that would be societally inappropriate and that would then reflect badly on the two of them together. So I could see why she made the choice not to stay with Alec. She goes home for a little bit. Things are difficult at home. She loses the baby. And then she ultimately goes out to be a dairymaid. And she's trying to sort of redo her life and just like live in as much virtuousness as she can. She's sure that she won't get married because she has this stain that, you know, behind her. She's, you know, not a virgin and this is a thing. But when she is a dairymaid on this other property, she runs into someone who she actually had a brief interaction with at the very beginning of the novel at this dance before anything happened. And he is there again. This man is named Angel Clare. He's the son of a clergyman, but he wants to go into farming himself, so he has decided to work on the dairy, and he meets and falls in love with Tess, and is also very forward with her, not like in a sexual, harassing sort of way, the way Alec was exactly, but he never really gives up on this whole we have to be married thing, even though she is always saying, I can't do it, there's no way I can get married. And she won't tell him why. I mean, this is a big taboo about saying that she was assaulted in the past and this stain on her legacy, and so she won't tell him why, and he keeps pushing. And I feel like this is like a sense of being emotionally manipulated. Here's someone who says he loves her and that he'd always be with her, and she has this thing in her past, but, the past is over in a way. Can't we move past it? This thing happened to her in the past, but, we're in the present and the future now. So she ultimately acquiesces and decides to be his wife. And on the wedding night, they both actually confess that they've had sexual discrepancies in their past. He's the one who starts it, that he had an affair before he was married as well. And as he feels certain, Angel feels certain that she'd forgive him, and she does. But then, of course, it's not reciprocated when she tells him what happened to her, which, technically speaking, again, was not so much a consensual relationship. Even in the text where you wouldn't say rape, he says that you were more sinned against than sinner, but he can't get over it. There's just too much like emotional baggage and drama around the idea of a woman not being a virgin and all of that. So basically their marriage is over as it begins. So we go back into the misery porn again, and he ultimately decides that he'll leave her with her parents while he goes off to Brazil to look into farming in that area, and that maybe he'd, send for her later. I mean, it's not a complete clean break. He does, I guess, grapple a lot with the decision and ultimately decide with some help that he's been too hard on her, or at least he can forgive her and come back. And also the narrative does go into, I think the omniscient narrator goes into the fact that Tess is proud and that there are ways that maybe she could have stood up for herself more and defended herself more, and that she decides not to because she is this picture of virtuosity, that even though this horrible thing happened to her that society cannot contend with, she is so virtuous and so prideful, I guess that is a more negative thing, that she doesn't stand up to him enough, and she also doesn't avail herself of his financial support and his family's financial support as much as she should when he's away and her family is still destitute and it's the winter and always things get worse and worse and yada yada. So I guess there is that, and it's nice to see that, I guess, that Tess is not just completely one-dimensionally virtuous. She's a more complicated character, and also the omniscient narrator, I think, gets rid of a lot of the BS that I didn't like so much, and far from the madding crowd with the stereotypical, this is how women are entirely affectation. It's more genuinely empathetic to Tess. So yeah, that's a lot of the novel. Things get worse and worse. Then Alec re-enters the picture, of course. He starts off at first as a reformed clergyman after his mother dies, but of course immediately upon seeing Tess, she calls out correctly that he's doing this sort of to buy his way into heaven. Like he is off, proselytizing, giving sermons to the wicked in a way, and it's sort of a fake faith. It's just a way to sort of feel self-righteous, I think. And she says something along the lines of, "Oh yeah, now you can join the cloth or the faith once you're done with all your frivolity." I think she accurately calls to the fact that he's not doing it out of any sincerity or genuine belief. And indeed, almost immediately after finding Tess again, he decides to leave the cloth, and he becomes a rake again, and he becomes even more obsessed with her and following her around and offering her financial and emotional help. And he's so in her face, he knows she's in trouble, unlike Angel. So the pressure's really building. And in a way, a lot of this is, again, based on the plot. Like, Hardy just keeps making worse and worse and worse things happen so that Tess doesn't have a lot of options. Well, she does have the one option to maybe let go of her pride and, talk to her in-laws, which she tries at one point. But it's just so overwhelming that she knows that she's kind of unwanted. She wasn't the wanted bride and everything. And she's just in a state of distress about everything so much that doesn't work. So there is this major looming threat that Alec is the only one who can really save her and her family from destitution, unless her husband comes back, and she does finally ultimately right him, and he finally does come back. But by that point, it's too late. And Alec has convinced her that Angel won't come back. And she's living with Alec as Mrs. d'Urberville. I mean, there's no direct insinuation that they're having sex in this arrangement, but maybe they are. In either case, it's a big, no, I suppose, for a married woman to be living with somebody else. So the only way she seems to see out of this situation is to murder Alec. So the tragedy of this book is that it ends with her in a hanging. I hope it's okay that I'm spoiling these 150-year-old books. And this also speaks to the fact that I think Hardy saw a hanging when he was young. A woman who was accused and who apparently killed her husband while he was in the midst of attacking her was hung for killing her husband. And I feel like, I guess he had a more nuanced take of what happened, like that this was self-defense and that maybe TESS was self-defense as well. It was a little less on the nose about it because Alec wasn't physically attacking her, but she certainly was so emotionally compromised. I mean, I feel like this whole book is her being in a deeply emotionally compromised state. I mean, I feel like the moral of the story is the Victorian era was just not good for women. It was not good for women. So it was miserable, but at the same time, there were some things I liked better. I feel like there was less stereotypes about the genders in this. I feel like that I guess Tess and also Angel a little bit got to be complex characters, although, with a name like Angel, I don't know, a saintly McPriestly man taken or something, I don't know. But there were some interesting themes in this. I really liked, dipping into the fact of this ancient ancestry, and I guess that it's a sort of a major world-building theme for, I guess, English history and families about what would it mean to have this ancient history and heraldry behind you. But maybe it's also commentary on what has become of England in the modern day, of Victorian modern day, when the d'Urbervilles, instead of being, aristocratic Normans, are now either destitute, highly removed descendants, or, frauds who aren't actually d'Urbervilles at all. And I guess there's more in here, interesting tidbits about the modern day, like at one point Angel and Tess are bringing the milk to the train to be brought to the city to be watered down, and it talks then about the people in the cities being less connected to nature and not being able to even drink milk as it is. It had to be watered down for them. So that's kind of interesting. And then the other major, I think, theme in here has to do with religion and the push and pull between Christian morality and also then sort of natural innocence, and that Tess is a child of natural innocence, and that might be a huge part of the reason why Alec was able to take advantage of her and why she suffered and tried to stay pure, or as pure as she could afterwards, but that there's that push and pull, I think, that is she like a child of nature? And that even made me think of a much more modern novel, Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. I didn't actually like that one much, but I was thinking about the main character was harassed by this man, and the main character was this nature child. She lived on the edge of society in the marshes of North Carolina, highly removed from all the other people. And her lover was this guy who ingratiated himself on her, much like the characters in some of Hardy's books ingratiated themselves, and kept on harassing her, and got sexually violent even, and she felt like the only way that she could defend herself was by killing him to make him stop. And I feel like there was a major argument in that book that she was acting with the laws of nature, that when nature is attacked, nature defends itself in the same vein. And maybe that's what Tess did as well, in a way. But yeah, I guess I'm not quite sure what to make of it. It's so miserable in so many different ways, but I feel like it's a little more empathetic, and some of the other themes worked for me a little bit more than Far From the Madding Crowd. So there's that. So with all of that rambling out of the way, so concludes my Victober 2022 reading and wrap-up. I hope I entertained you and did not offend anybody's classical Victorian sensibilities too much. But I will leave links to my Goodreads reviews for both of these books down below, where I discuss things in more detail, what I thought about these two books, so check down for that. And from here on in, I am leaving October in the past and moving on into November. In fact, I would say am deeply into November, at least NaNoWriMo-wise. I've been doing my writing and trying to keep on top of the National Novel Writing word count so that I can have a vlog to show you that I will be posting sometime on Sunday. So stay tuned for that. And then later in the week, I will be posting a non-nano video. I will start with my page 112 tag for November to add a new book to my November TBR. So, yeah, lots going on here. I hope all of you are enjoying your November reading and writing and what have you. And thanks again to Katie from Books and Things and Katie Howe for organizing Victober, even if I really only took part from the sidelines. Still felt nice to have the excuse and the opportunity to feel part of the community in some little way. So yeah, thanks so much for watching, everyone. And I'll see you next time.